So I'm Seoku with you, Research Associate at FOIP Development Forum. I'll be facilitating today's webinar, Japanese Strategic and Economic Partnership with Africa in a Turbulent Era, Achievements, Challenges, and Way Forward. We are inspired by the launch of this new report by IFRI, French Institute of International Relations, which try to assess the new policy direction towards African development, particularly the Japanese economic diplomacy under the Abe administration. And we are so happy to have Ms. Céline Pajon of IFRI, the author of this report, as a main speaker. And now let me introduce today's speaker and commentators. Céline, Mrs. Pajon is a research fellow and the head of Japan research at the Center for Asian Studies in IFRI. Her research fields are Japan's foreign and defense policy and the evolving geostrategic setting of the Indo-Pacific region. She is also an international research fellow at the Canon Institute for Global Studies in Tokyo and a senior researcher of Japan program at the University in Brussels. We also have Dr. Katsumi Hirano of Institute of Development Economies and Professor Izumi Ono of FOIP for commentators. Dr. Hirano, I think everyone knows this. He's a leading researcher in the field of African economies in Japan, with a very deep knowledge of the Japanese investors in Africa. And Professor Izumi Ono has been leading research on international development and the new partnership between business and development. And previously, she was director of the JICA Research Institute from 2018 to 2020.
Oh, let me share my screen because I would like to show you some slides along my presentation so that it can be a little bit more entertaining. Maybe just as a very quick introduction. You see that my report has been written in French first and published in December last year, and it was just translated into English. That's why you have this date of December, but it's just released on the IFRI website. So please look at it if you have some time. My research was based on, I said, interviews, first-hand materials such as the JETRO survey, but also secondary literature. And why did I choose this topic? Because actually, I think it's a topic that is not very much covered as such. You can find a lot of literatures on Japan's ODA policy or economic diplomacy in Asia. And you have a lot of information also available, around each TICAD summit. But actually, it's quite difficult to find a kind of comprehensive analysis, comprehensive vision of what Japan is doing in terms of economic diplomacy in Africa. So that's why I was encouraged to look at this topic in particular. And before I start, I would like to clarify the scope of my work. When I use the term Africa in my report, I mean essentially sub-Saharan Africa. I think the Middle East policy might be a bit different because of the question of energy sourcing and so on. And I would like also to focus on the Abe era, because the Prime Minister Abe stayed as Prime Minister for a long time. So that's and he was also very proactive. So that's a good opportunity, I think, to be able to look at both the objective and the result of his policy. And finally, I am aware of the limitation of my work because I could not make any fieldwork, obviously, and I did not conduct some interviews in Africa with African experts and so on. So I'm very much aware of the limitation. So I will start. Sayoko, please do not hesitate to cut me, to mute my mic if I'm too long on this. So let's start with this nice pictures. So as you know, during his term in office, the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sought to demonstrate Japan's high level of interest in Africa, and in particular by pledging a record amount of financial support during the TICAD V and VI. More than $60 billion were pledged in total. Also during his mandate, you've seen in 2016, the first TICAD summit was held on the African continent in Nairobi, Kenya. And during this summit, the Prime Minister Abe announced the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy or vision, which was quite important because it actually shaped the whole Japanese strategy in the broad region for the years to come, and not only Japan, other countries also joined this kind of approach. Abe also traveled quite a lot to Africa during his mandate compared to other Japanese prime minister. But this said, this not means that Abe has any specific ties or personal ties to Africa. But he had certainly very proactive diplomacy and very clear vision for his country to kind of bring back Japan as a significant player on the international scene, and reinvesting in Africa was part of this vision. So with Abe, Japan is back in the world and back in Africa too. And so I argue that Japan's economic diplomacy under Abe in Africa pursued two objectives, one purely economic and the other geopolitical. In the first instance, the economic aim, it's to catch up with other Asian and Western actors in the African market, and move from a focus on the ODA, official development assistance, to a more private investment-based approach. And in this case, the economic profitability governs the investment decision. In the latter instance with the geopolitical goal, the aim is to compete directly with China and offer an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, as the Africa policy is viewed as part of Japan's systemic rivalry with China. And in this case, the political considerations govern the investment decision. So actually, when you look at the numbers, Tokyo's objective do not seem to have been met, and there is a significant disparity between the political rhetoric and local reality. Even if some progress has been made, Japanese companies are still very reluctant to invest in a continent that they do not know so much. And if you compare numbers, in 2019, the Japanese investment to Africa totaled $12 billion. It's only half as much as it was in 2013. So the total investment actually declined during the whole period. So in this condition, the rhetoric on the direct competition or rivalry with China is also proving difficult to maintain to Africa. So I argue that two gaps can be identified. First, between Japan's Africa rhetoric and the reality of Japanese involvement, and second, between the Tokyo ambitions and its capabilities. So in my report, I intended at least to provide a more realistic, or I hope a more realistic assessment of Japanese involvement in Africa by first examining the government's strategic ambitions and compared it with the local realities. So let's start with the strategic priority. And the first priority was to attract the private investor, Japanese private investor, to Africa. So Prime Minister Abe came back to power in 2012 with an economic agenda. The priority was to boost the economy so that Japan could remain a leading power in the world. And then to do that, the growth strategy was adopted in 2013. One of the focus was the search for new international markets. And this growth strategy noted that, in particular, Japan lagged behind the European actors or China in Africa. You can have a look at the graph taken from the Economist, look at the trade and foreign direct investment in particular, and you can see the Japanese share, which is quite small compared to other actors at that time. So Africa was in full bloom, high growth period then. So the government had to try to encourage the private investment and to give incentive to the Japanese company to gain a foothold in this growing consumer market. Also trying to promote infrastructure export and also to try to secure natural resources and energy resources, because we were at the time in a kind of post-Fukushima context. Also, as you know, the development concept of the development cooperation evolved. In 2015, there is a new charter that made clear that development cooperation is no longer only based on ODA, but it will be a combination of public-private funding. So the aim was to really break the stovepipe and try to find some synergies between private and public fundings. The private investment were also expected to take over from ODA because the ODA budget has been declining for more than 20 years. And so the private investment in company were given a greater place and a greater role in the relation with Africa. And this is exemplified by the kind of transformation, evolution of the TICAD. The TICAD Summit, which has evolved from a kind of coordination forum focused on ODA to a platform for the Japanese and African business communities really to meet and to network. And at TICAD VI in 2015, you have 75 companies, Japanese companies who attended. And as part of the 3 years development assistance package of $30 billion that was pledged then, actually $20 billion were to be expected to be covered by private investment. So this means that the securing private investment is really essential to keeping Japan's promise of financial support to Africa. So how is this strategy implemented? Here, I would like to really briefly highlight who are the main players and what are the main tools used by the Japan's economic diplomacy. And I will be brief because many people in the audience today knows much more than me about this and are actually part of the thing decision making or implementation agency. So by no means I will be exhaustive in my short presentation. So as you know, Japan is famous for its very structured and efficient economic diplomacy. It was designed first and implemented first in Asia. ODA helped to build infrastructure, local infrastructure, and helped to pave the way to the Japanese company to settle them. And this strategy evolved, of course, over time, and have been implemented to Africa. And at the top of the decision-making process and implementation, you find the strategic decision-making centralized in Tokyo, and particularly in the Kantei, the Prime Minister's Office Secretariat. Under Abe, the advisor from the Métis were quite influential. They supported a very proactive economic diplomacy and pushed the country to lead on key business activities such as the infrastructure export. Also, as you can see, the high-level political commitment and visit from minister plays important roles, especially in establishing economic and strategic partnerships, as well as investment agreements to regulate the company's activities. And then the government, in the case of Africa, has established a number of measures to try to support Japanese companies to facilitate their setup there and better cover their investment-related risk. And actually, the companies really ask the government, really ask for the government support because they faced a complicated business environment in Africa, especially with issues like political and regulatory instability, lack of transparency, poor infrastructure, unskilled workforce, and so on. And so a number of governmental agencies, ministries working together to provide this support to the company. So this is only listing the main players, and then many others are missing, I'm sure. Of course, I didn't put that in the slide, but MOFA and the Métis play a key role in setting the broad policy and priority for economic development and economic cooperation. Then, as you know, JICA manages ODA. It is involved in establishing some public-private partnership. It provides vocational training, and it participates to financial packages to build infrastructure. JBIC, the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, is also involved in infrastructure financing. It provides loans, equity, and guarantees for investment in energy and mineral resources. It's not the only one to do that. You're also JOGMEC, who is also participating in this. Now, risk coverage is particularly important for infrastructure projects because they are kind of a long-term project, and the profitability is not immediate. And also, it's particularly important to ensure investment in a risky business environment. So the NEXI, Nippon Export, and investment in insurance is providing risk coverage. Especially since 2016, related to terrorist attack, a natural disaster, and other circumstances. Finally, the JETRO, which has 8 offices in Africa, also plays a very important role in supporting companies, particularly by providing them with some information on the African market and investment opportunities. So you can see the framework is quite sophisticated, maybe quite complicated, but we can go back on this later on. As I would like to move on and highlight the second priority of the Abe government in Africa, which is competing with China. So as you know, Japan's decision makers consider maybe their greatest challenge to try to manage the rise of China, to try to face the rise of China, because it's providing opportunities for sure, but also many challenges, as you know, challenges in terms of security. But China basically is seen really as a kind of strategic rival because Beijing is trying to challenge the norms of the liberal international orders and trying to impose its own standards, particularly through its Belt and Road initiatives, which is a major infrastructure financing project, but not only, it's really big. So just to say that the Chinese factor really determines, really informs, really structures all of Japanese foreign policy, including in Africa. So what are Japan's concerns regarding Chinese presence in Africa? First, of course, China's economic presence in Africa has surged in the last 15 years, leaving Japan's far behind. China is the continent's leading trading partner since 2009. There are nearly 3,000 Chinese companies now operating in Africa compared to less than 800 for Japan. And since 2013, Beijing has committed to provide development assistance double the amount of Japan's. So therefore, Tokyo is concerned about its lag, but also about Beijing growing political influence in Africa. Because for Tokyo, China's economic expansion is progressing at the expense of high standards on good governance, and it's fueling cases of over-indebtedness in the continent. Dependency to China's investment also enable Beijing to leverage support on issues relating to its key interests, including territorial dispute in the South China Sea, for example. Another sensitive point is China's opposition to Japan's effort to reform the UN Security Council, where Japan would like to have a permanent member seat. And indeed, for many years, as you know, one of Japan's political priorities in Africa has been to secure the support of African countries for the UN Security Council reform. Finally, Tokyo is concerned about China's expanding military presence in Africa, be it through its presence in the UN PKO, capacity building for the African armed forces, and it's particularly its base in Djibouti that was set up in 2017, actually not too far from the facility run by Japan. So how Japan is reacting to this Chinese increasing presence? It's reacting by more activism, but also by dissociating itself from China. So in 2014, Tokyo decided to boost the TICAD visibility and importance by holding it once every 3 years, rather than once every 5 years, sorry. And alternatively in Africa and Japan, just like the Chinese Forum on Africa cooperation. But at the same time, Tokyo really highlights the characteristic and the difference of its own contribution. For example, regarding TICAD, Tokyo really argue that his forum is truly multilateral, unlike the Chinese forum, and it's really co-organized with institutions such as UNDP, the World Bank, and African Union. Additionally, because Japan cannot compete with the amounts spent by China in Africa, it allies the quality of its offers rather than the quantity. So you have this motto, this very strong argument on the quality infrastructure, Japanese government pushing quality infrastructure criteria. It's really it's really at the heart of Japan's infrastructure export strategy and differentiated approach vis-à-vis China. And finally, in 2016, you have the free and open Indo-Pacific announced, and it has been designed actually as a kind of alternative to China Belt and Road Initiative, based on 3 pillars: the economic prosperity fostered by connectivity, the upholding of the rule of law, and the maintenance of maritime freedom and security. So the rhetoric on rivalry between Japan and China in Africa stemmed from the Abe's government's broad geostrategic vision, not only in Africa, but it's broad strategic vision. It's also applied to Africa. But this rhetoric has actually also been extensively driven by the media that almost systematically places Japan's initiative in Africa in the context of a supposed competition with Beijing. So I think that the message conveyed by the government that Japan should present itself as an alternative to China in Africa actually generate high expectation. However, this does not correlate with the interest, the resources, or the limitations of the actor who can realize this vision. So you can see some disparity occurring between the stated objective and the partial achievement. So I would like now to look at the local reality. And I'm very late already, I see. So I will try to be quick. For sure, the measure to boost investment have had some positive effect on the investment. You can see in 2020 almost 800 Japanese companies operating in Africa compared to 500 10 years ago. The newcomers went to countries already well known to the Japanese private sectors, such as Kenya, South Africa, and East Asian countries. And business are getting also more diversified from automotive, which is quite traditional, to more newer sectors such as industrial painting or agri business. So to be very quick, I looked at the JETRO survey back in 2019, saying that 80% of Japanese companies are now in Africa because they would like to to take advantage of the prospect of the growing Africa market. The three most attractive countries have been Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And actually, the incentive of trying to develop natural resources or being part of a ODA-funded program, is not only is not really important right now. It's an incentive for only 14% of the companies, despite the fact that trade in raw materials is still crucial and accounts for the greater share of African export to Japan. But we can come to that later. There's a lot of issues related to price volatilities and so on. So this said, despite the progress and success continent-wide, the Japanese investment have been declining since 2013, just like the value of trade, as you can see on the two graphs. And so at the TICAD VII, the Prime Minister Abe was obliged to give up setting a specific amount for investment for the next 3 years, simply stating that the Japanese government will make every effort to ensure a private investment exceed the $20 billion. So the total pledge for the 3 years period before 2019 seems far from being reached. However, you can see that the Japanese MOFA is claiming the opposite, because actually the MOFA decided to change the way it measures investment. It changed it from a net basis to a gross basis, and this is considerably, of course, increasing the total amount. Indeed, MOFA calculated that the net investment did not include some funds, such as the dividend paid by the African subsidiaries to the Japanese parent companies. So it would better reflect and be a better reflection of actual Japanese investment in the continent. So why investment are not up to expectation? There are several factors. The first factor is Japanese companies' perception of Africa. Africa is still seen as a very different, distant, risky continent. It is also not a high priority target for business because business is focusing more on Asia, and then you have Europe, US, and other, and Africa is maybe a very far away. Also, there is a feeling that Africa is already well covered and well known by the European companies, also the Chinese, that are quite aggressive in their commercial strategy. And the investment climate is still quite challenging for the Japanese companies who are quite risk adverse. So it's still difficult for them to invest in this kind of context. And just to say that this perception has been reinforced to a certain extent by the economic situation that deteriorated since 2015, especially with the fall of the raw material prices and other kind of situations. The second factor is the difficulty in transposing the model that is applied by Japan in Asia to Africa. The close cooperation between the public authority and the private sector, which helped the Japanese company to expand in the Asian countries that proved difficult to implement in Africa. Actually, this collaborative effort at the consultation and public-private partnership is mainly focused on the Asian market. Furthermore, the African workforce, which is less skilled and sometimes more expensive than in Asia, makes it difficult for manufacturers that want to rely on a local supply chain as they do in Asia. So it's making more complicated for them to set up there. So the Japanese company tends to approach African country with the same kind of analytical framework or software than they do in Asian countries. And this is leading to misunderstanding and disappointment. A third factor is a disconnect or the gap between the governmental priorities and companies' economic interest. And this is highlighted or illustrated by the difficulty in attracting private investment to build infrastructure. There are three major connectivity projects that Japan is supporting in Africa: the Nakala Corridor, the East Asia Northern Corridor, and the West Africa Growth Ring. And traditionally, infrastructure has been financed by ODA, and it has proved very difficult to involve the public-private partnership. Legal instability hinders investment in projects that have the long-term profitability, and also the deteriorating security situation in some countries further increase the risk. And it's making all that quite complicated. And furthermore, the infrastructure market is already extensively dominated by the Chinese. I'm sorry, I will take a few minutes more if I am allowed by my chair to finish that. And so if you maybe we should rethink when looking at the local realities, we should rethink the narrative of rivalry with China. In a way, we can see a competition in terms of norms, and we see Japan is being quite a successful norm entrepreneur. When you look at the agenda, the quality infrastructure agenda, it was successfully promoted in OECD, World Bank, G7, G20. It's really legitimate now. Japan also is quite successful to push and to promote the issue of over-indebtedness, to try to raise that in international setting, because of course for the countries that have this big debt, it's a problem, but also it's a problem for Japan because it's making very difficult for Tokyo to invest in those countries that are already very indebted to China and others. When you look at FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific and Africa, FOIP is only marginally relating to Africa, or partly relating to Africa, as I would say, because it's mainly involved the East African coastal countries in terms of maritime security, connectivity, blue economy. That's true that Japan has been actively involved in maritime capacity building, Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, for example. With regard to connectivity, it's still difficult, as I explained, to see how Japan can really expand its investment in the infrastructure in the region. And FOIP was also designed as being a kind of driver to promote joint investment with like-minded countries like India. With Asia-Africa growth corridor that we've seen in 2017, but actually this was not so successful, and I can explain later on if needed. So in the economic field, the narrative of competition is actually difficult to maintain, I would say. The Japan's rivalry with China can at best be described as asymmetrical. There is no way Japan can match China's capacities in Africa. So we cannot really talk about economic competition. And actually, it seems that the Japanese company would be interested to enter into a joint project or some kind of cooperation with Chinese companies at some point, especially on infrastructure project, for example. It would make some sense. So therefore, for some actors in the Japan-Africa relationship, the rhetoric on China-Japan rivalry in Africa is neither justified nor useful. And the politicization of this economic cooperation with Africa is causing actually frustration, particularly in the business community. So I'm concluding very, very quickly. Just to say that maybe the latest TICAD summit could mark the end of the cycle, and we will see this narrative of competition with China decreasing a little bit, and Japan putting more effort to pragmatically advance its economic interest in Africa in a kind of longer term perspective, and with a kind of maybe low profile but endurance and sustainable way. And I will just show you the slide, but won't go into the details. But there are a few element on which Japan would like to base its approach in the future to try to ensure the more sustainable approach to Africa. And with this, I would like to end my presentation, and then my apologies for being too long.
Okay, thank you very much, Céline.